I'm Lai Leong for the SMU Center for Presidential History, and I'm with Dr. Haruo Iguchi. And today is February 15th, 2017, and we are on the SMU campus in Dallas. Dr. Iguchi, could you start by telling us what the state of relations was between the US and Japan in the 1990s before George W. Bush became president?
Yes, during the first half of the 1990s when Bill Clinton came into office, the relations between US and Japan became rather awkward due to the continuing trade frictions between the two countries. And there was this policy shift in the Clinton administration towards depreciating the value of the dollar. And so for first time in Japanese yen history, the yen, I think, went up, skyrocketed to the 80s level, dollar to 80, somewhere in the 80s. And that basically accelerated the exiting of Japanese manufacturing industries into other parts of the world. And that that in turn created Japan's role in providing supply chain for a globalized economy, but that was in the long term. But in the short term, the appreciation of the yen created considerable problems in the domestic economy. And then the second part was the increased trade frictions between the Clinton administration and the Japanese government, especially over autos, and then to some extent, in semiconductors and other areas where Japan still had a considerable competitive edge. And then once that was settled, and the issue on security became a major issue in terms of what to do with the U.S.-Japan security arrangement in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. The Higuchi report, which was produced in the Murayama cabinet, made a policy prescription to possibly consider a more multilateral approach towards the defense arrangement of East Asia. It did not negate U.S.-Japan bilateral security relations, but it also called for Japan to consider more multilateral approach in security-related issue. That policy prescription, even though it did not state that Japan was going to negate the bilateral security relations, did raise some concern in Washington, D.C. about Japan distancing itself from the U.S.-Japan alliance. That was never the case, even under the Murayama cabinet, the first socialist-led government coalition since 1947, and that government was very much short-lived. And then, of course, in Okinawa, there was the unfortunate incident of a sixth grade girl being raped by some American Marines, and that created an uproar in the local Okinawa community. And for the first time since the late 1960s, there was a major protest around the Okinawa U.S. military base. And both governments, U.S. and Japan, had to come up with crisis management over that issue. And the situation also called for what to do with the security relations. And but then in the end, the two countries formulated a new framework that called for the re-enhancement of the bilateral security arrangement in the post-Cold War environment. And that rearrangement also called for increased Japanese role in providing peace and stability of the East Asia and the Asia-Pacific region. So the two governments began to at least in the two countries began to discuss ways in which the American Armed Forces and the Japanese Self-Defense Forces could cooperate in providing peace and stability for the Asia-Pacific region. And the backdrop for that was in relations to, on the one hand, the Okinawa situation, but the other issue was the Taiwanese Strait issue. And there was this increased tension in and around the Taiwanese Straits as a result of this political change in Taiwan and this social movement within Taiwan for distancing Taiwan from mainland China and possibly consider a two-China solution, at least among some elements in Taiwan. And that in itself created uneasy relations between mainland China and Taiwan. And the Clinton administration at one point had to send the 7th Fleet stationed in Yokosuka to counter this major mainland Chinese naval exercise near Taiwan. So, but then the situation in turn called for rationalize the situation in turn rationalize the need for re-enhancement of the bilateral security relations between U.S. and Japan to function as a counterweight against this potential tension in the Taiwanese Strait area. And then, of course, the North Korean issue, because since 1990, starting around 1993, North Korea began to officially tell the international community that it was going to go nuclear. And as a result of that, during the Clinton administration, there was this move to contain North Korea's drive for creating nuclear weapons. And that, as you know, ended with the Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, going to Pyongyang and make a deal with Kim Il-sung. And for the time being, that issue was postponed. But the issue of North Korea building nuclear weapons. Of course, behind the scenes, though, they did agree to build, North Korea did agree to stop building nuclear weapons, one type of nuclear weapons, but then behind the scenes it was pushing for more the uranium-grade nuclear weapons, and that project surfaced during Bush Jr.'s years in the aftermath of 9/11. So, but then the Korean Peninsula issue really called attention for more coordination between the U.S. Armed Forces in Japan and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. And the background for why the collective self-defense issue had to be put into a public debate had to do with this potential Korean Peninsula debacle. Because under that circumstance, it's not just the U.S. Armed Forces that will be moving into South Korea to help evacuate South Koreans and other nationals away from the battlefields, but the Self-Defense Force would have to come in to help evacuate many Japanese who are living and working in South Korea. And in that situation, there would be a situation in which the Japanese armed forces would have to use their weapons next to their American counterparts, and that would go into the issue of collective self-defense. And the Japanese government's take since the 1960s has been that Japan on book can exercise collective self-defense, but in practice it would refrain from doing so, and it would focus on a very narrowly defined self-defense of Japan's territorial waters, territorial airspace, and territorial grounds. And then so from the latter part of 1990s onwards, after the Clinton administration and the Japanese government agreed on enhancing security relations between the two countries, the issue of collective self-defense became something that had to be dealt with within Japanese politics. And then starting around 1992, in the aftermath of the First Persian Gulf War, Japanese self-defense forces did manage to participate in United Nations peacekeeping operations, starting with nation-building operations backed by UN peacekeeping forces in Cambodia. And Japanese self-defense forces did participate in that project in building roads and bridges, etc. And that became the first case for Japan's involvement in UN peacekeeping-related operations or nation-building related operations. And with that success, the Japanese government managed to expand the role of self-defense forces in nation-building operations sponsored by the United Nations. But then that issue also called for what to do with this collective self-defense issue, because under the once the Japanese self-defense forces began to participate in these UN peacekeeping-related projects, there could be a situation in which the self-defense force would have to exercise firepower to protect themselves. But then the issue would also the situation might involve the need to protect other armed forces operating under the United Nations peacekeeping-related projects, but then that would be a kind of a collective security a kind of action, which is something closely related to collective self-defense kind of issue, too. So during the latter part of the 1990s, there was increased academic and public debate over what to do with collective self-defense and also what to do with collective security, and how the self-defense forces in Japan might be able to exercise those options. But it's not until in the 2000s that those issues became much more closely addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's move on to the 2000s since you mentioned it. Mm-hmm. So when George W. Bush became president, what was the expectation on the Japanese side in terms of what the U.S. policy would be?
Back at the time when Bush Jr. Became president, I was involved in this Okazaki project sponsored by the Okazaki Institute. The institute was financed by the Hakuhodo advertising agency. For some reason, the people running the Hakuhodo is the second largest ad agency in Japan. Dentsu is the biggest ad agency in Japan, and the second is Hakodo. And Hakodo is used to be controlled by the Seki family, and but then when when the diplomat Okazaki Hisahiko became the head of the Okazaki Institute, the Hakodo was run by non-family members. There was some family feud that was, that had happened in the early 1990s, and then most of the families lost control over the company. But then for some reason which I do not know, diplomat Hisahiko Okazaki had some close working relations with the Hakodo. So when he retired from Foreign Office, he became the head of the Okazaki Institute. The institute remains still to this day. The diplomat Okazaki died about 2 years ago. He had been a close advisor to Shinzo Abe. As a matter of fact, probably until when Okazaki died, I think Prime Minister Abe would find Okazaki to be a very fatherly figure to whom he could talk very casually, and then talk about his various issues that he had in mind, and various problems that he was thinking of that needed to be addressed. And Mr. Okazaki would act as a father-like figure in guiding Mr. Abe. That seems to be the situation that I have heard from several sources. But back in 1999 or so, when I got involved in the Okazaki project, of course, Shinzo Abe was still, a mid-level politician who had been in politics for about 10 years, but he was not involved in the Okazaki project. But Mr. Okazaki have been involved in this, this like various policy prescription over the years. So once he retired from Foreign Service, I think he got very interested in making all sorts of, policy recommendations, etc. And for some reason, he wanted some young academics to get involved, and then initially he contacted Kitaoka Shinichi, who is now head of JICA, and back then he was a professor at Rikyo University, and shortly afterwards he became professor at University of Tokyo, his alma mater. And then his friend and friend for many years, Professor Akihiko Tanaka, who is now back at the Oriental Institute at the University of Tokyo. I think those two people were called by Mr. Okazaki to have this kind of policy recommendation group that would work with Center for Strategic and International Studies. And for some reason, I got a call from, who did I get a call from? I think Professor Kitaoka. And then I said, well, it seems to be an interesting project, so I'll get involved. Mr. Okazaki happened to be a friend of my father too. They were in the they were about a year apart at University of Tokyo, but they knew each other from the University of Tokyo years. And they were back then good friends, but my father wrote a book on Pearl Harbor, and there was a fallout. So at the time when Mr. Okazaki passed away, I don't think they were not so close. They did not have close relations, but back when I got involved, they were still close enough. I mean, already my father had written a book, an article on Pearl Harbor, and Mr. Okazaki has a more right-wing view of Japanese history, and he did not like it. There were rifts occurring then, but I think things could get patched up. In any case, I avoided that issue. So when I was involved in, and there were other young scholars who were called Sakamoto Kazuya, who's a professor at University of Osaka, and had been and when once the first Abe cabinet was established, Sakamoto Kazuya became a member of a policy recommendation committee in advising enhancement of U.S.-Japan alliance. And then once Prime Minister Abe came back into power 3 years ago, Professor Sakamoto was tapped to get involved in the writing of the domestic laws on national security, the laws that created sort of like a package arrangement in terms of peacekeeping operations, etc., and a controversial law that which created a lot of political brouhahas during last year and then 2 years ago, but we can go to that if you want to, but yeah.
Why don't we come back to
Yeah.
when George W. Bush became president?
Yeah.
So the group that you were in, how did it assess the situation?
Yeah. So initially, when at the time when the election was going on, Mr. Okazaki was telling us, well, if Gore wins, we're not quite sure if our policy actually, he was saying that the policy recommendations will be heard in Washington, but we have, Mr. Okazaki was saying we have closer relations with the Republican Party. So if they win, I think it's better for Japan. So, and then we were at this restaurant in Tokyo when the final tally came out, and then said, well, and then initially there was a blackout phase, right, in terms of like who won, but it seems that George Bush won, and and then Okazaki was saying that now we can get down to business, because he had Michael Green was involved in the project too. So Green, and then I think Mr. Okazaki had close ties to Richard Armitage. Armitage was not involved in the project, and because our counterpart was CSIS, and the person on the American counterpart, the central figure on the American side was Michael Green. So, and then we didn't really predict that he would get a job at NSC, but at that juncture, he had difficulties in getting a job. So we were thinking, what's going to happen to Michael? And because when we were doing that project initially back in 1992, I think he had he was like trying to get some job in the Washington D.C. area, but the job openings were not opening up, and then there's a guy, a friend of mine, who was working in the United Nations, who was doing a lot of things for Michael Green, and then he's now back in Japan, but he's a North Korean specialist. So, and he does a lot of behind-the-scenes North Korea-related stuff, and he was telling me that he was basically providing Michael with data on Japan, the security side of issues and then I was asking him, well, what's happening to Michael? I'm working on this damn book right now, and it's like, okay, that's good. I mean, you're like, I hope you're getting a job, or it's like, I'm not getting a job either.
So they got jobs in the Republican
they got a job,
administration.
And then Michael got a job, and then eventually he, through other sources, he has the Japanese friend of mine had cultivated ties to the LDP. So he got a job he got sent to the United Nations as a de facto North Korean watcher guy. And So that got settled. So that was happy ending for them. But Mr. Okazaki was really happy that Bush Jr. won, and then we had a symposium going on in Washington D.C. shortly after Bush came into office, and so at CSIS, and for some reason. So we came to D.C. and we stayed at the Governor's Hotel in downtown D.C. And I saw Mr. Okazaki, and for some reason he kept a distance from us. And I noticed that he had a briefcase, and he was had this close at hand. I said, oh, it was it must be something valuable in there. And then he would whenever we were we have meetings prior to the CSIS symposium, but he would leave early, and we weren't quite sure what he was up to. I was asking Mr. Sakamoto, is he going to White House or what? I said, no, I don't know if it's White House, but I think he has some kind of LDP people or the Japanese government told him to do something. Huh. And I think that's what he is up to. So, okay, all right.
So did you find out what he was up to?
No.
He wasn't communicating with the White House, or?
I think my hunch was he was going to the State Department, or something, the security-related issues, and he was doing that behind the scenes when he was there. Yeah.
Now, at the State Department, since you mentioned it, Richard Armitage was there, and he had co-authored a paper with Joseph Nye, about a more muscular foreign policy with respect to East Asia, and especially, that's supposed to be built around the Japan-U.S. alliance. Yes. What were your thoughts on that at that time?
Okay, I think under Bush Jr. was doable, and then especially in the context of, in the aftermath of 9/11, that was much more doable. Yeah. So
what do you mean by more doable?
More doable in terms of Japan providing more, the describing of Richard Armitage, more boots on the ground kind of a thing. That might be doable in the context of 9/11, because there was war and terror occurring, and Japan had to play an increased international role, especially if the war on terror, if there's an aspect on war and terror that had a United Nations framework, and hence with that aspect eventually translated into Japanese Japanese self-defense forces providing fuel in the Indian Ocean for the coalition forces, doing bombing operations in Afghanistan. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about that, about how the war on terror had this impact on Japan's internal debate about the role of the self-defense forces?
Yes. Well, let me start with the social psychology initially, because when I saw, my personal experience is that, the night before 9/11, 9/10, my wife and I, we had a major bickering over, we were about to buy an apartment, and we had major bickering, I said, we should buy this now. She said, the location ain't good, the price is pricey, we're getting a raw deal. And I said, this is not so bad in the long term, we could rent it, etc. And then, night came, we went to bed, and then in the morning we turned on the TV, and then lo and behold, oh my God, what's happening with the towers? And then I just, after seeing that image, I told my wife, Yoko, okay, the deal is off. Okay, this is a major crisis. There'll be economic confusion for a while. We're not going to buy with the apartment. Okay, forget about it. I was really obsessed, but forget about it. And then and then gradually we got the details of the information, and oh my God, Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and then shortly, it was a couple of months afterwards, about a month and a half afterwards. Back then I was working for Doshisha University, and then the school asked me to respond to a reporter from a local paper, Kyoto Shimbun, for an interview about what's going to happen with the war on terror in Japan. And so there was an interview piece I did, and I told the news reporter that a really nasty age has come to this world, and we really have to watch out for potential bombing of the bullet train, public transportation. It is a really, sad, unfortunate, but potentially nasty period in history has arrived. And in terms of security, we have to really be cautious, especially in public transportation. They can wreak havoc, especially in places like Japan, which society that depends heavily on fast and efficient public transportation system. The system can be disrupted very effectively through simple bomb explosions.
I'm curious to hear that you had that concern, because Japan is not normally a country we think about when we think about terrorism, or at least not international terrorism. So I'm curious to know that there was that concern.
Yeah, well, the thing is, a lot of Japanese have forgotten that the Japanese Red Army wreaked havoc on Japanese society in the early 1970s. The Japanese Red Army was an offshoot of some Marxist group that went cuckoo. And there was a lot of student activism in Japan as elsewhere in Europe and the United States in the late 60s and early 70s. One manifestation of that in Japan was this formation of the Japanese Red Army, which started with a certain strand of Marxist thinking of a utopian society, but and eventually some of the leaders became eventually many of them escaped to North Korea, and then many of them died under mysterious circumstances over the years, and then many of them were involved in the kidnapping of Japanese near Sea of Japan, except they were not directly involved, but they were helping the North Korean intelligence agency what to do, etc. But
so the concern was not with Muslim terrorists.
But the concern was with Muslim terrorists. When I was saying that, with Al Qaeda operating now. Right. So in terms of terrorism, yes, there was this forgotten memory of Japan having its indigenous terrorists wreaking havoc in Japan in the early 70s. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the head office got blown up. The head of the police, the head of the Japanese National Police, his house was bombed, and his wife died, a package bomb. So things of that happened pretty frequently. And then in Beirut, the Japanese Red Army guy did a mass killing of people at the Beirut International Airport with a machine gun. So things of that happened in Japan. So even though my concern was some group affiliated with Al Qaeda that might do some nasty things on the Japanese public transportation system or some public facility. Yes.
Was the close U.S.-Japan alliance seen to be a liability in that?
In that case, yes, a possible liability, because for one thing, in New York, over 3,000 people perished, but some of them were Japanese. So this is like a non-discriminatory attack. But the fact that Japan has been providing logistical support for American armed forces might eventually called to the attention by the might be a focus of attention by Al Qaeda or its affiliates.
I see.
Yes. So and especially if Al Qaeda was interested in disrupting a capitalist society, then Japan would be an easy target because it doesn't really have, heavy-duty security apparatus in surveilling people, etc. So if you wanted to, say, hamstring global capital markets, just bomb certain parts of Tokyo effectively, and that would create considerable havoc and confusion in the international market at large.
I see.
So
did the war on terror push U.S. policymaking in a particular direction that it might not have taken if 9/11 hadn't happened?
Yeah, I mean that's the rise of the neocon kind of worldview would have not been implemented had 9/11 not occurred. So that provided a perfect opportunity for this policy recommendations made during the Clinton years. The policy recommendations made by political groups that tended to be affiliated with the Republican Party and people who were and political groups who were affiliated, who had affiliation with or have had some working relations with the neocons.
What about on the Japanese side?
On the Japanese side, I think with the 9/11, the 9/11 provided opportunity for opportunities for those those policymaking people in Japan who had advocated closer U.S.-Japan alliance to push for that. Yes. So 9/11 did provide that opportunity for enhancing U.S.-Japan alliance.
I've read some scholars arguing that 9/11 also provided the opportunity for conservative groups in Japan to push for greater militarization.
Oh yeah.
Do you think that happened?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of in the context of after 9/11, in terms of militarization, well, it has been happening over the years. For one thing, there are several reasons for a greater militarization in Japan happening, but 9/11 would be considered as a factor in having this kind of enhanced militarization of Japan. Yeah.
What were other factors?
The other factor would be the supply chain issue, global supply chain. So, when George Senior was in office, Japan was interested in making its own indigenous FSX fighter. It's the next generation fighter jet, and during the Reagan years, in the mid 1980s. It was it the third generation, fourth generation? I think it was the fourth generation jet fighter that was being considered to be produced, and the Japanese government initially wanted to go totally indigenous. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries said, "We got the zeros. We had the zeros until 1945. It was taken away. We want to make jet fighters. I mean, in addition to passenger jets. I mean, the passenger jet right now is still." The final product is about to come out, but it's been postponed for the sixth time or something like that this year. So, but Mitsubishi Heavy Industry had that ambition. And then the Reagan administration said, okay, well, like this is during the heydays of U.S.-Japan trade frictions, right? And the Reagan administration said, there are forces in the Congress, they're saying that you should buy completely American aircraft, airplanes. And so the Japanese government settled for the traditional formula between U.S. and Japan. It would be that the airplane that Japan would be using for the air self-defense force would be an American plane, but it will be re-enhanced through U.S.-Japan development project. So, and then during Bush senior year, Congress tried to make that arrangement completely American. In other words, the U.S. Congress wanted the American jets to be purchased 100% without no re-enhancement of that airplane through a U.S.-Japan joint development project. And finally, it got settled. The situation got settled by, I think, about one vote or so, in settling with the traditional formula. American airplanes, but then with some re-enhancement through U.S.-Japan joint project. But then in the 90s, the global supply chain became the model for American manufacturing industry. So Boeing was willing to get parts that were produced from other countries if their products were good enough. So Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Toyo Rayon Company, and others had wonderful business opportunities to produce parts, jet engines, the outer parts of the aircraft. Uses the fiber, right, produced by Toyo Rayon, etc. So Japan, even though there was this, issue of going, the remilitarization. So this would go into remilitarization issue. Okay, the Pentagon also went into the global supply chain model in the late 1990s. And then Michael Green was one of the proponents of this too, in the context of this global supply chain issue. And he was writing articles about, well, we need to have more joint development of military parts between by U.S. and Japan. Things should be jointly developed by U.S. and Japan, but then Japan had this traditional principle of not exporting military products elsewhere. The situation changed during the last 2 years. There's been legislative changes. Initially, there was a change in the diet over the guideline for that. And then now Japanese heavy industries can export military products should they wish to do so. But it took over this number of years in going that direction. And back in the late 1990s, people like Michael Green were proponents of that. And then, and probably, so there was that trend. And then for this enhanced joint, possibly the conservative forces and the heavy industries trying to push for ways to have this militarized product. Yes, but then in addition to that, 9/11 did provide some catalyst in Japan, not to the extent that it provided catalyst for the neocons or people supporting a worldview of the neocons in the United States.
Now, Japan did send troops to Iraq, right?
Yes,
In 2003,
yes.
2004.
Yes.
How was that received in Japan?
In Japan, initially, it was a mixed. I mean, it was sort of like there were enough. The situation met the criteria stipulated in the peacekeeping operations related laws. I mean, there was ceasefire. The country was the government of that country called for United Nations peacekeeping operations. So the basic criteria of sending Japanese self-defense forces were met. But in the Japanese diet, I mean, there were considerable opposition to that too, because it's the same argument that was done during the First Persian Gulf War. Japan does not need to send those opposing sending self-defense forces overseas would argue that there was no need for Japan to send its self-defense force. Japan can contribute by sending doctors or providing supplies. Even even though the Japanese government would argue that we need to send these goods, blankets, food, water, basic necessities by air self-defense force, freight planes. The opponents would say that, well, we can ask, All Nippon Airways or Japan Airlines or some charter airplane company to send these products. So the same argument happened in the context of the post Saddam Hussein period related issues. But overall, though, there was enough understanding in Japanese domestic public opinion and enough votes in the Japanese Diet to have the self-defense forces to be sent over to Iraq.
Was there any concern in terms of popular opinion at that time about the war on terror in general? How did the Japanese people see, the what George W. Bush called the war on terror?
Initially, in Japan, I think people bought the argument of the weapons of mass destruction stuff, but then after the details came out, then there was this shock in the Japanese public opinion about, okay, so who was misled? We were misled, but then was it who misled us? Those arguments did occur. Something similar to the United States. Yeah.
Was there, because there was a perception at least from this side of the Pacific, that Japan came to embrace the preemptive war policy. Was that seen to be a problem?
Within those in Japan, those opposing, active Japanese, self-defense force presence outside of Japanese territory would constantly, go back to the question of that you had pointed out. Yes.
So was that seen to be problematic? How did the Japanese people, what did they think of it?
In terms of war,
the preemptive war.
The preemptive war. I think the majority of the Japanese public would say that, well, is there a need to use excessive force in especially in Iraq-like situation? Yes. Because that would translate into potentially escalating the situation in the Korean Peninsula too. So that did raise concerns within Japanese public opinion, who were much more cautious towards, active Japanese engagement with American formula for security policy.
Now, President Bush also at one point said that Southeast Asia was the second front in the war on terror.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Did Japan play any role in supporting counterterrorism efforts in Southeast Asia?
In terms of, I don't think there was in terms of Japanese, say, National Police office people familiar with with terrorism to go overseas. Maybe surveys possible, but I don't think there was any active coordination between American law enforcement or intelligence and the Japanese law enforcement community on that. But within Japan, though, there were people who are specialists in the security related issues would write articles about, well, I will write something that is reluctantly said in Japan, but I call for racial profiling. So there was Sasa, Mr. Sasa, who was involved, who was in charge of back in the early 70s of quashing this Japanese Red Army hideout in Karuizawa. That took about a month or so in quashing the Red Army stronghold there. But and then he subsequently built up a career in the Japanese National Police Force on domestic security related issues. But he was one of the first ones, and he became, after retirement, he became an opinion leader in security related issues, and and particularly in the aftermath of 9/11. He would say, well, Japan's woefully deficient in dealing with, terrorist issues. I dealt with the Red Army, but now this is more international stuff. And he wrote a major article in an opinion piece in a monthly publication about, we'll have to do racial profiling. And he said that on TV too. Yes, it's something that should not be taken lightly. But I'm sorry, but the way to shortcut any risk of terrorism would be that. Yeah, but then the average Japanese won't go into that direction. But then in terms of Japanese uneasiness with people who have Middle Eastern outfit, etc. Yeah, there is that level of uneasiness, and after 9/11, I mean, the stickers began to appear in almost all bus stops. Whether it's in rural area or in cities. Like if you see any suspicious luggage, call the law law enforcement. And then, public announcements in subways, bullet trains, buses, and any suspicious, packages or bags you see, just tell us. And yeah, I mean, that's been the staple of, it's now a familiar, slogan, sticker, logo, and public announcement. That has not changed. And yeah, I mean, it's like,
so it's really affected daily
life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's now so natural to see it and hear it. So it's now part of the air. Right. But when I saw that near Nagoya University, where I used to work until last year, at a bus stop, it's like a dinky, bus stop. Like, who cares about terrorism? It's like if you see it, it's like, oh my God, but then it's like a manifestation of this security concern, or yeah.
Well, I think unfortunately we only have time for one more question.
Uh-huh.
So I want to ask you about the relationship between Prime Minister Koizumi and President Bush. Mm-hmm. They famously had a very good working relationship.
Yes.
How much do you think that mattered in terms of U.S. and Japan relations?
At that juncture, let's see. Oh yeah, in terms of building confidence between the two countries on in enhancing the bilateral alliance, I think that was very important. Yeah.
How would things have become different had it been a different prime minister, or if the rapport hadn't been there?
I like, say, Hatoyama, or people who are much more domestically oriented, or if you got a socialist kind of a political personality, that would have created a problem, because then the politician would say, oh, why do we have to stick with the American formula? Yeah, that kind of situation. And Koizumi was willing to go along with it, and he was hawkish in beefing up the capability of the self-defense force. So I think Japan at that juncture got the right guy in charge, or that's my opinion.
Sure.
Yeah. But with the Chinese issue, in terms of him visiting Yasukuni Shrine, that was not necessary. I was so pissed off. Okay, like what could he? How could he do such a stupid thing to it was predicted that the Chinese would go bonkers. But then him going to Yasukuni Shrine had to do with domestic politics too, and it had to do with that our chief rival at that time was Hashimoto, and the Hashimoto faction in LDP. And the way for him to sustain his power, because he was basically an outsider within LDP. The only guy who was so like a backer of Koizumi was Mr. Mori, whose whose time in office was short-lived. But and so he came from Koizumi came from a minor faction. The only big political capital he had was public opinion, and the biggest elephant within LDP at that time was the Hashimoto faction. And Hashimoto had been the benefactor of the Japanese Veterans Association for since he became a politician. So the way for Koizumi to cut one of the pillars of Hashimoto's power base was to visit the Yasukuni Shrine, but that was never publicly stated. So the Japanese, public too, most Japanese felt that this is obnoxious. I mean, of course, within right-wing people, conservative Japanese and right-wing said, go for it. Yeah, but then most Japanese felt that, is this really necessary or what? And then Koizumi never explained, because he doesn't, he's not verbal. He doesn't, when he gives lectures, he goes from one anecdote to another anecdote. It's pretty engagement. But then But if you start analyzing, like he didn't have any framework for his talk. So he talks like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So, Koizumi's main reason for visiting Yasukuni had to do with dismantling, torpedoing Hashimoto, and he succeeded in that. But the price was, unnecessary bad relations with China. And at Nagoya University, we had like exchange student program being established. That was postponed. And then Nagoya University's Faculty of Law has close relations with the Japan Communist Party. So some of the faculties are very pro JCP. And one of my friends, I'm friends with that person, but I'm not political. I don't talk politics, but I don't like JCP, okay? But, this person went to China and was treated very badly because of the Sino-Japanese, relations. And I said, oh my God. It's like, no, socialist brotherhood.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So, yeah, no wonder the JCP went totally national. I mean, they're one of the most nationalistic, communist parties. They don't have friends. So, yeah, they parted company with the Soviet communists, and they had a feud with the Chinese Communist Party in the 1960s, and have not been on speaking terms since then. So,
Wow. Well, something else to learn about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.